But some local reaction first, Andrew. I mean, looking past the glitz of it all, the handshakes, etc., was anything actually achieved here?
Well, I said last week, Peter, that I wasn't entirely sure the purpose and the objective of this visit. I'm not sure I'm any wiser sitting here today. But yesterday I was concerned with Albanese's defence of the PLAN, 3 vessels circumnavigating our country earlier this year, and the equivalence of that with the Royal Australian Navy and allies conducting freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea, through which trillions of dollars of maritime activity and trade pass. And, the PLAN going way out of its way to come way down here to the Tasman Sea and do live fire exercise, which were clearly designed as a shot across the bow to make Australia pay attention. Furthermore, in terms of obeying or ignoring international law, we just passed the anniversary of the 2016 arbitral finding on the South China Sea, which Beijing summarily ignored. And it's been operating inside the UNCLOS-defined exclusive economic zone of the Philippines for quite some time, doing what it's like. So there were times yesterday when Albanese sounded like he was a spokesman for Xi Jinping and not for our national interest.
Well, I mean, because he asked, didn't he? Hey, as I said, give us a heads up next time you do it, to which Xi Jinping said, thanks, no thanks. It's international waters, we'll do as we please. No, he's not going to change. So, I mean, is that, there's all this talk of a reset of our relationship. Is that truly at the heart of our relationship where, if we're obedient, we'll get somewhere?
Yeah. Look, China and the US, Australia, the Western world, have 2 very separate, very different operating systems, and they're incompatible with each other. And one of the areas of possible expansion in the chapter is AI, and China is operating a very different ecosystem in that space. If you're driving a Tesla, you're operating in a different software operating system compared to, say, driving in a Zika, which is about to launch in Australia. And the US and China are going to be competing for data, and huge amounts of data, and how that can be used, how that can be weaponized. And furthermore, I would add that it makes no sense for Australia to be cooperating with China on AI, as some scribes here have suggested, when it's a complete surveillance and censorship state.
Yeah. Let's go to you, Isaac. Good to see you, by the way. Thanks for your time this morning. So, I mean, no doubt the White House would be curious about the goings-on in Beijing at the moment. What do you think is the US view of this meeting, if anything?
I think the United States understands that countries the world over are trying to balance between China and the US, but I don't think the White House loves that, and certainly I don't love that. And I think there's a lot of frustration with countries around the world that have as their most important security partner the United States and their most important economic partner, China. And countries often think, and I think Australia sometimes falls into this trap, that Beijing just wants an economic relationship, or that it has no strings attached deals. But I think folks should really understand all of the heavy strings that come into engagement with Beijing and make sure that they're pricing that into their deliberations.
So just elaborate on some of those heavy strings.
Some of it is on Taiwan and on the United States doesn't recognize Taiwan as a country, but it supports Taiwan a lot more than most other countries do. And Beijing leans on countries like Australia to move further away from Taiwan. It's supporting Chinese dissidents. It's advocating for free speech in China. It's complaining about unfair trade practices. All of these things can put a country in the doghouse.
Yeah, which we've been in the past. I mean, back to you, Andrew. The Premier, and this was an aside last night, this came after the meeting with the President, he wants better access now for Chinese businesses here. That would mean a watering down of foreign investment laws, which are unlikely, but is that one to watch?
Absolutely it is, and that was entirely predictable. China definitely wants more access. What does that look like? I mean, yesterday I heard the Prime Minister say, we'd be signing various MOUs. Well, what are those MOUs and what are the contents of them? The other thing I'd like to point out is nobody in the travelling press pack yesterday questioned the Prime Minister on China's overt support for Putin's war on Ukraine. which has been going since the get-go. Now, the Prime Minister commented during the voice referendum that the thing that kept him up at night was Russia's war on Ukraine. Well, why wasn't this discussed? And furthermore, China's also been a backer of Iran and its proxies in the Middle East. So, the media pack that were traveling with the PM, I don't think there's one member of that media pack that has a China background, an Asia background, has done commerce in the region. And some of them are coming away with the impression that, China and Australia are new buddies, all is honky-dory, we're all doing free trade, we're going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya, which couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, that's right. I mean, and you're going back to that point of they're just going to keep doing what they want anyway. China's going to keep doing what it wants anyway. Just going back to you, Isaac, I mean, there's been a bit of discussion lately, particularly when it comes to Elbridge Colby and this review on AUKUS that's taking place at the moment. What's your thoughts on his position in the region and where we are in his thoughts, where you think Australia ranks in his thoughts, the importance of us, I suppose, when he's being quite heavy-handed, it seems?
I think if Australia wants to show this administration, wants to show folks like Bridge Colby the importance of it in the region, putting on tougher policies that restrict negative and inimical behaviors from the CCP is really a way to go. And I think it gets back to that point on balancing. Countries cannot have their cake and eat it too. You can't trade so much with China and then outsource security to the United States and expect that to be the way things go. I think Bridge is pushing more for a focus on China as a national security threat. And I think there's real questions in the United States about what countries in the region are willing to do in the case that the Cold War between the United States and China turns hot.
Okay. Just a final point here, back to the Prime Minister, Andrew. I mean, was he kind of caught between a rock and a hard place yesterday? When he's taking questions, he's a guest of China's, he's there in Beijing. Can't be too critical, I suppose. But has he ever really been that critical is another point.
No, he hasn't. He's signed up for that. Look, I think Australia's got there's a couple of positives, but we've got a pretty long track record, and this applies to both sides of politics, of not understanding China sufficiently and making some pretty big strategic errors. And the Port of Darwin's one of them. I think signing off John Holland to a Chinese state-owned construction company is another one of them. Even if you go back to on Albanese's previous trip to China, he went to the Temple of Heaven, walking in the footsteps of Gough Whitlam. And Gough Whitlam opened the conversation back in 1970, visiting the ailing Chairman Mao, who, the brilliant historian Sarah Payne described as putting Humpty Dumpty back together again at the end of the Civil War. But in terms of governance, we had the Great Leap Forward, which is a catastrophe and led to a mass famine, followed by 10 years of absolute chaos with the Cultural Revolution, which was all about Chairman Mao saving his own hide. And Gough Whitlam went to visit a guy who at the time was responsible for the deaths of 50 million civilians in China. And I think we ought to reflect on that, and also the true nature of the CCP. I'd also, a final point, or two final points, if I may. One is on green steel. That is technology that is yet to be proven at scale. And it's certainly a lot more expensive than current methods. And I can't see, I went out to Shogun Capital Steelworks back in 1990. I can't see Chinese steelmakers adopting a more expensive way of making steel. Okay. Finally, yesterday, she also hosted the Shanghai Cooperation meeting in China, with the foreign minister of Iran, Russia, and India, and so on. So he's had a busy day.
Yeah, he sure has. Isaac, Andrew, good chats. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll talk to you again soon.